for 2018, and today's Friday, which means today is the community episode of Bad Morning News, which just means I will be sharing links shared in the community links channel of our Discord, and just some housekeeping. We are being sponsored by Brave Browser. Thank you for checking out their site. Brave Browser is a good way to avoid becoming just another uh, info cattle to the major corporations. So if you're inclined to check out Brave Browser, I'll drop a link following the show in the description box. And if you check out Brave using that link, it will support the show as well. So thank you, Brave Browser. Excuse me. So I'm CGA, aka Cryptic Cynic, with you today. I'm the only available host for today, so apologies for that. Apologies for the uh, different format here. Just have a blank screen. And hopefully, our friends, the rest of our others of our crew, will be back here with us on Monday. I'll let you know if I hear anything about scheduling. So, the first article submitted from Danielle Hatfield. This is from the Washington Times. Vatican makes deal with China on bishops by Francis D. Vatican City. The Vatican and China said Saturday they had signed a provision agreement over the appointment of bishops, a breakthrough on an issue that stymied diplomatic relations for decades and aggravated a split among Chinese Catholics. The deal resolved one of the major sticking points in recent years, with the Vatican agreeing to accept 7 bishops who were previously named by Beijing without the Pope's consent. The development comes nearly 7 decades after the Holy See and Beijing severed official relations. Beijing's long held insistence that it must approve bishop appointments in China had clashed with absolute papal authority to pick bishops. With the status of the 7 bishops now reconciled, the Vatican said all bishops in China are now in communion with Rome, even though the Catholic community in China is still split between Catholics who belong to the official Chinese church and those in the underground church who remained loyal to the Pope. All right, so that was our first article submitted by Danielle Hatfield. Thank you for submitting that. Yeah, that's interesting. I guess China. Honestly, I didn't know China even had their own official Catholic church, but I guess it makes sense. They have their, in order to allow any kind of other religion or ideology to be practiced within China, I suppose they felt they needed an official Chinese approval stamped version of the Catholic Church or whatever. But whatever. It is what it is. Unfortunately, China is known for taking away the rights to free religion and freedom of thought in that sense, and has worked very diligently over the years to suppress Christian groups as well as other religious groups because they want the state, they want their own authority. Uh, Communist or not, they want themselves to be the only ideology and religion of its people, and it seems that they view any other kind of religion to be a potential threat to them, and that it would that it might potentially lead people astray from worshiping the Chinese government as the central authority over their lives. So that's a pretty interesting article. Um, Get interesting to hear about that. Thanks, Danielle. And Our next article submitted by Danielle. Also, thank you for sharing another link with us. This is also from the Washington Times, written by Stephen Dinan. Yale State immigrant likely double, possibly triple previous estimates. Professors at Yale University have roiled the immigration debate with a with the new study calculating a billion and 30 million illegal immigrants in the U.S., as much as 3 times more than most demographers figure. Professor's model looked at estimates of how many people came illegally, how many people likely left, and concluded there are a lot more people who arrived than the 11 million suggested by tradition. Its likely figure is double that million. If true, it would mean U.S. officials have done a poorer job of catching illegal immigrants than imagined, and that 1 out of every 9 people living in the U.S. is here legally. Policy debate about resources to devote to this issue and policies, including deportation, amnesty, and border control, depend critically on estimates of the number of undocumented immigrants, which sets the scale of the issue, said postdoctoral associate Mohammed Fazl. Fine. Let's see. Edward A. Associate Mohammed Fazl Zarandi at the Yale School of Management. They published their findings in PLOS One, an open access scholarly journal, and sparked fierce pushback from the demographers who study the issue and say professors' numbers are impossible. We believe these new numbers represent at most an interesting academic exercise. But are ultimately greatly off base and thus counterproductive to the public's very real need to. The professors. At the professor's real need to understand the true scope of the immigration issue and address it. The migration who were asked to do a peer review of the study said in their response. The number of people in the country illegally has always been a touchy question and is perhaps even more freighted now under Trump. During the 2016, Trump said the numbers could be as high as 30 million, drawing protests from fact checkers who cited the traditional demographers. A 2005 report by analysts at Bear Stearns concluded there were 20 million illegal immigrants, far outpacing the more accepted figure at the time of about 12 million. Sorry, I'm having kind of issues with this page here, but the gist of the article is that there was a new study, I guess by Yale that shows higher figures and usually are given, but I guess these new figures are waiting to be peer reviewed by other people. So we'll see if that happens. And I mean, I think this just shows how how difficult it is to pull so many things, and that's why it becomes really political in the sense of you'll have one think tank or one polling company that will want to support a certain narrative, and they can skew their results to one side, and you'll have the same on the other side of the issue. And I see that happen with so many things going on domestically. where polling tactics really come into play, and people will just basically buy whatever polling data they'd prefer to present in with their think tank or to push a certain agenda or another. So I don't know. I've just never really trusted polling very much, or polling, or any of these studies where you try to count people. In this case, I guess you're counting, you're counting people, but we'll just have to see how that goes. All right. So if you'd like to submit any links to cover today, you can still submit that in the Discord under community links, and I'll get to that if I can. Next, I have a short update to a story just talked about last week, I believe, or maybe this week. But this was the story about a woman who was caught in floodwaters after Hurricane Florence last week or a couple weeks ago, and she was charged with a bunch of crimes. Basically for being a good Samaritan and trying to help these animals. But I sent updates here from the Free Thought Project. Thanks to the power of the internet, charges against woman for rescuing pets in hurricane dropped. Because of a relentless group of people putting pressure on government officials, the woman who was arrested for rescuing pets during a hurricane has had all charges dropped. If you ever wondered about the power of the internet, wonder no more. The pressure that readers across the nation and the world put on officials in Wayne County, North Carolina regarding the arrest of Tammy Hedges for rescuing and caring for animals during Hurricane Florence was relentless enough that all charges have been dropped. Ms. Hedges' organization released the following statement. We are very blessed that the charges against our founder, Tammy Hedges, have been dismissed. We remain optimistic that no other charges will be filed and that this is the end to a terrible, terrible situation. We hope to devote time and energy to our rescue crazies, claws and paws, and to our renovation of our dream project. We strive for a lifelong dedication to working with state and local law enforcement to make North Carolina safe. For our animals, we cannot begin to express our heartfelt support, appreciation for the outpouring of support globally for CCNP's founder, Tammy Hedges. We wish to personally thank Raina Neolirum from Langhorne, Pennsylvania, for her generosity, foresight, and love for animal security by starting that first GoFundMe account. Although we do not know you, we are sisters in the fight for animal welfare. If you are ever in our area, please make some time for CCNP. This experience has unified rescuers and has made our organization realize that not only do we need to be vigilant in our rescue efforts, but also in our legislative efforts to foster animal welfare laws that are conducive to actually helping owners, rescuers, and animals. All right. So the good news is that woman is not going to be prosecuted for trying to help animals. So that's good news for any normal, decent human being, bad news for the state. Um, and, I certainly hope that this situation doesn't happen again. But as was stated in the initial article about this incident, a big driving force behind why they probably arrested this woman is because the county wanted their cut of money from being the ones to have custody of animals and have people pay to get them back. So whenever there's a state interest, um, be wary. Um, doesn't make me too hopeful that a real change will occur, because the government is not going to willfully give up their potential money making scheme. So, but yeah, I'm just glad about hearing the good news to that today, whereby this woman will not be charged for being a good Samaritan. Okay. Sorry, just pulling up the next article here. Thanks for bearing with me today with the unconventional format. I'm sorry, I don't have any interesting graphics or anything like that. I'm not too tech savvy, so I kind of just get it done the easiest way possible. Alright, so this article is from the Free Thought Project, written by Matt Agri. Mainstream media using Kavanaugh's sex scandal to distract you from the real reason he shouldn't be appointed. In July, Donald Trump nominated D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. Since then, there have been numerous allegations of sexual misconduct levied toward the justice-to-be. Whether or not he's guilty of these allegations is left to be determined. However, it does serve as a great distraction from his actual Constitution-hating and tyrannical tendencies. While Kavanaugh may be an ostensible supporter of the Second Amendment, his record indicates that he all but cannot stand the Fourth, and he's not that big a fan of the First either. While the allegations against Kavanaugh should certainly be investigated, no matter how they are being spun by the left and the right, he shouldn't even be in this position based solely on his previous record. But no one is talking about this. Instead, the left and right are involved in a mudslinging orgy of victim shaming and kangaroo courts. According to this Supreme Court nominee, he thinks it is just fine and dandy for police and government to track you, spy on you, and dig through your personal life without a warrant. On multiple occasions, Kavanaugh has been a lone voice when it comes to supporting the state's rights to warrantlessly spy on its citizens. As Reason points out, in 2010 he dissented from the D.C. Circuit's decision not to rehear a case in which a three-judge panel had ruled that police violated a suspected drug dealer's Fourth Amendment rights when they tracked his movements for a month by attaching a GPS device to his car without a warrant. Kavanaugh claimed that putting a GPS tracking device on a person's car without first obtaining a warrant was just fine because it didn't constitute a search as defined by the Fourth Amendment. To Kavanaugh, bypassing the courts and tracking an individual without their consent is constitutional. In this line of thinking, the Fourth Amendment is not violated even if police trespass on someone's physical property or track someone's cell phone. Luckily, he was the only judge on the panel to think this. In June, the Supreme Court ruled specifically on this case, noting that collecting such information actually does constitute a search and therefore requires a warrant. But it gets worse. In 2015, Kavanaugh issued a statement strongly defending the NSA's phone metadata collection program, arguing that it is entirely consistent with the Fourth Amendment. To Kavanaugh, sweeping programs that collect information from innocent citizens' phones are not in conflict with having the right to be free from unlawful search and seizure. Seriously. According to Kavanaugh, the Fourth Amendment allows for searches without individualized suspicion when the government demonstrates a special need that outweighs the intrusion on individual liberty. Exactly what this special need is that can constitute a Gestapo-like police state surveilling its own citizens is a moving target that has already been proven to be abused over and over again. The sacrifice of our personal liberty for security is and will forever be a false choice. Senator Rand Paul said of Kavanaugh's views on the disposable nature of the Constitution. Kavanaugh has no qualms about applying decades-old case law to the digital age, and he has endorsed the idea of a counterterrorism exception to the Fourth Amendment's warrant requirement, said Liza Gotein, co-director of the Brennan Center for Justice's Liberty and National Security Program. While the left is calling for Kavanaugh to be executed over the sex abuse allegations and the right is attacking the alleged victims, others in Congress, who see through the facade and media distraction, are trying to draw attention to the fact that Kavanaugh is a champion of the police and surveillance state and an enemy to privacy. Representative Justin Amash does not have a vote on whether or not Kavanaugh will be appointed. However, this hasn't prevented him from becoming the only Republican to speak out against the real reasons he should not be appointed to the Supreme Court. Privacy advocates must fight, Amash tweeted. There are many potential nominees with a conservative record on abortion, guns, and regulations. The only question is, will the Senate confirm one who is really bad on the Fourth Amendment when so much is at stake in upcoming digital privacy battles? Indeed, as technology increases, so does the desire of the state to use it to spy on us. The case is headed to the Supreme Court in the future over what constitutes an unconstitutional search will undoubtedly be vast in number and detrimental in deciding how much freedom and privacy Americans get to keep. As for if Kavanaugh gets appointed, Amash has some harsh words to those who are blindly supporting him based on party lines. When Kavanaugh is on the Supreme Court, undermining our Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable searches and seizures, it will be too late for others to join me. All right, yeah. So as the article says, and as a few others have been saying, there are real reasons to oppose Kavanaugh. First and foremost being that he's just another, police state piece of crap. Unfortunately, like way too many judges. That's why we have a police state, because when the government's in charge of making sure the government is being fair to the subjects, it doesn't work out well for the subjects. So of course, we have this body that interprets a piece of paper that arbitrarily tells us what rights we are and are not allowed to have, and we're supposed to believe that that is freedom. But of course, in the political sphere today, not that is not even being talked about at all, not by anyone who claims to be a liberal or for individual liberties and freedom from unreasonable search and seizures. I mean, these people are not even bringing that up at all, and it's all just this complete circus where people are just blindly either, choosing their sides based solely on if they're in the Democrat Party or Republican Party, and it's really hideous to watch. I was just on Twitter yesterday during the hearing and just seeing, and I don't even follow most of these, typical center left, center right people, but even then in my timeline, there was just tons of ridiculous attacks going back and forth, just the most simplistic crap. Um, yeah, I mean it's a circus, and ironically, I just saw a quote from one of the representatives or a senator. Actually, yeah, I think he's a senator. One of those. Who gives a shit? I don't give a shit if he's a senator or a representative. They're all pieces of shit to me. But whatever his name is, Orrin Hatch, the Republican from Utah, he actually said that the whole thing is a circus, and that may be the only thing I ever agree with Senator Orrin Hatch on, that this whole thing has become a circus and is disgraceful to watch. And that's very true, very true. Um, again, there's real reasons to discuss, but of course it just devolved into this complete shit show, and get the popcorn and just watch all of this ridiculousness happen. Very, very depressing, but not surprising at this point. I saw, I was watching some good coverage that was pointing out just the spin on the left and right. This is, I don't know if you all are familiar with We Are Change, but they have some pretty good content. I definitely recommend them. And yesterday they had a stream where they kind of talked about the hearing and played some of the audio and the coverage from the hearing. And I totally agree with their assessment of just the complete blind partisanship one thing that was mentioned was the fact that no one, there's been no one corroborating the testimony. Um, of course, whether you believe someone or not, um, it's you kind of need supporting evidence, and then of course on the left, they're saying, well, he's not in court, but he doesn't. He's not in court, so he doesn't need due process in terms of becoming a Supreme Court justice. But the problem is with that is really what's happening today, just in how big of media circuses these things become. He is basically seen as guilty by a certain faction of the country. I mean, he's already been written down as a guilty man. And I think due process can be used in a more general sense of just like, whatever happened to giving people the benefit of a doubt instead of jumping to conclusions and saying, yeah, he must be guilty just because, we don't want to believe women would lie or anyone would lie, and so he's automatically guilty. And you know, that's just not where I'd like to see society go. And you can have both be compassionate, and you don't have to be, you don't have to be a victim blamer to say at the same time, I'm not going to run to join the lynch mob here and assume I know something that I can't know. So, it is what it is. As we know, we're not a stranger to these kinds of scandals in the U.S. at least. Um, but yeah, I mean that's what's so sad to me about this whole thing. It's nothing. It's not about actually as Caitlin Johnstone on Twitter tweeted yesterday. She said something like, if who you believe is determined by which party you support, why don't we just skip the whole act? If you choose either Kavanaugh or the accusers based on your party affiliation, why not just skip that and just go back to arguing whose party is better? Because this whole thing is not even necessary if it's not being adjudicated based on facts, and it's just purely being adjudicated on people wanting to believe whichever side would promote their own political ideology. And that is very sad. And as many have said, of course, you had Dianne Feinstein up there pontificating. And yeah, as was said by others, like, do you think she gives a crap whether this woman was actually assaulted? I don't think so. She doesn't care about shit. I mean, her husband makes, money from military machines that kill children. I don't think she has a heart. I don't think she gives a shit about anyone but herself. So, anyhow, um, so anyway, as far as that goes, today they are voting. From what I've read, they'll potentially vote at least the first round of voting today. And from what I read, I think it's the majority leader has the power to bring the vote to the floor, even if this initial vote doesn't necessarily pass. So we'll just have to follow it throughout the day, in the coming days, and see where we'll be next week with this. Um, Let me know if you guys have any thoughts about this in the comments on the YouTube live chat, and I'll read them if I get a chance to here. Let me try to check. There we go. All right, we got the information war. Hey, information war, how's it going? I wanted to look more official this morning when I make awful jokes in and taste. And Kavanaugh will hurt the Dems for the next 20 years. He's going to be a hard ass. Yeah, I think that's probably that accurate, probably the case. All right, so here's another article from Reason.com. This is really kind of just a very one of those stories that you hear and you're like, I'm not surprised. I mean, it sucks, but I'm not surprised. You always have stories like this popping up every so often. And so this article is written by Scott Shackford. Texas Attorney General ignores 75 years of Supreme Court rulings, trying to force a student to stand for the pledge. The irony is that she's protesting authoritarian police behavior. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton's website says liberty and justice for Texas in big letters at the top. He seems to have a funny idea of what liberty means, although he thinks the state of Texas can force students to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. India Landry, 18, was expelled from a high school in Katy, Texas because she has repeatedly refused to stand for the pledge. Landry is suing the school district in federal court, arguing violations of her civil rights. Now Paxton, as the state's top prosecutor, is asking to intervene in the federal case. To say that court precedent is on Landry's side may understate things. A Supreme Court decision from all the way back in 1943 makes it very clear that public schools cannot force students to salute the flag or recite the pledge. You might expect that as the state's Attorney General, Paxton would be defending Landry's free speech rights. Nope. He wants to argue that Landry cannot refuse to stand for the flag without her parents' permission. It seems that Texas schools have opt out forms that parents are expected to sign to give children permission to not stand. In a press release, he claims, quite incorrectly, school children cannot unilaterally refuse to participate in the pledge. Landry's mother is supporting her lawsuit, which makes Paxton's approach more than a little strange. Even stranger is the Supreme Court precedents he's attempting to use in his motion to justify his position. He quotes Texas v. Johnson and Spence v. Washington, in which the court said that there is a special place reserved for the flag in this nation, and thus we do not doubt that the government has a legitimate interest in making efforts to preserve the national flag as an unalloyed symbol of our country. But this quote comes from a Supreme Court case affirming the right to desecrate the flag as a form of protected speech. The decision specifically forbids the government from punishing citizens for disrespecting the flag. The unconstitutional wankery can be explained by election year politics and by the fact that Landry is reportedly refusing to stand for the pledge to show her support for kneeling NFL players. In other words, Paxton is supporting the school district punishing a black student for participating in a protest that is fundamentally about how people in authority abuse their power to punish black people. All right. In any case, yeah, I mean, you always kind of hear things like that come up that would seem on its face to be obvious. Like, yeah, obviously you're not going to win a case trying to force kids to stand for the pledge. I mean, you would think these attorneys general would understand that at this point. But as was said, I mean, it's probably just grandstanding. Whoever this attorney general is, I guess he has to be reelected or whatever. I honestly don't even follow all that closely enough to know how all that crap works, but whatever it is, you know, he's taking this position to show off his bona fides and worshiping the piece of cloth, you know, whatever. You know, do you, man, just if that's what you feel you have to do, you know, to waste more tax money, and go ahead and do that. Waste the taxpayers' money over something that ridiculous. Like, yeah, because I mean, what would the rational expectation be on his part? Does he think he's going to force students to stand for the pledge? I mean, yeah, it makes no sense when you follow out the logic there. But we'll see what happens with that. All right. I have a couple updates from antiwar.com. They're always good for the foreign policy news that never gets reported in the mainstream media because it would admit fault on the part of the United States in destroying the fuck out of all kinds of countries all over the world. And if you follow only mainstream media, you will have no idea about most subjects in terms of foreign policy and geopolitics and militarism and U.S. empire around the globe. And you will not understand any of those things if the mainstream media has their way, basically. All right, first article written by Jason Ditz from antiwar.com. Pentagon continues to vastly underreport civilians killed in ISIS war. While the U.S. air war against ISIS in Iraq and Syria is mostly over, the Pentagon continues to dutifully release civilian casualty reports that are both preposterously low and which falsely take credit for efforts to kill fewer civilians. This latest report put the overall death toll of the U.S. war in both Iraq and Syria to 1,114 civilians since 2014. Even passing familiarity with NGO figures shows this is far too low. Air Wars has put the figure at 6,575 civilians in the same period. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights also issued their own statement just a few days earlier than the Pentagon, estimating that the Pentagon had killed around 3,300 civilians in that period of time and covering only Syria. Estimates have shown comparable numbers of deaths in U.S. wars in both Iraq and Syria, but the Pentagon's official figures skip many of the biggest incidents as not credible, and in other cases will offer official death tolls that are a mere fraction of the documented number of bodies found. So, yeah, I mean, that's a pretty disgusting story, but again, unsurprising. I mean, of course, the Pentagon has an interest in minimizing civilian deaths as much as possible. Um, you know, I certainly would never believe anything they have to say on that. I don't really understand who would be stupid enough to say, yeah, the Pentagon is only admitting to killing X amount of people, so it's not that bad. Well, really, like, what else would they say? I mean, admit that they're just slaughtering, entire cultures and destroying their countries, destroying sovereign nations, and making it so they're third world shitholes after being, prosperous and modern places. Now they're complete empty shitholes. And you think that's not your fault, Pentagon, I don't know. Whatever. So, but yeah, so this comes on the heels of Trump signing a new spending bill, of course, which leads to this piece of news also from antiwar.com. U.S. will soon spend more on debt interest than on the military. The U.S. spends far more on its military than any other nation on earth, but very soon it will not be the top expenditure of the U.S. government. Rather, rising interest rates and years of mounting debts mean that soon interest on the debt will overtake that. Interest costs will be 390 billion next year and more than 900 billion within a decade, according to the Congressional Budget Office. At present, U.S. military budgets are in the 700 billion range and themselves constantly growing. Somewhere these two growing lines will intersect, and the runaway military spending is a big reason why. There simply is no way for the U.S. to keep pouring substantial portions of $1 trillion down the well annually for the military without borrowing, and that debt is just growing. The U.S. debt is huge, and that is in no small part because of decades of runaway military spending and trillions dumped into nuclear weapons. Lawmakers largely are not interested in this matter right now, likely reflecting their unwillingness to cut military spending to try to get the debt back in line. So that's by Jason Ditz. Yeah, I mean, articles like that really just highlight, that everyone who ends up in a position of power in Washington is just going to support the military industrial complex. Um, it's like the analogy, do you want the left boot or the right boot? But, it's both the left and the right working in lockstep to march towards war, and that's what's happening. Whether people think they're supporting a Democrat or Republican, then you have people who thought Trump was like a different, like a maverick, different kind of Republican who would be more isolationist and stop all this runaway spending. Well, that doesn't seem to be happening. He seems to, the same things are still happening, and that's just because that's what's going to happen regardless of who's in office. I mean, I don't even know or care if Trump is really responsible for taking the actions that happen, or if there's, what's referred to as a deep state or whatever. But I mean, whoever it is, regardless, nothing is going to change within the system to roll back all of this military spending. This cannot be voted out of. There's not going to be a magical Democrat or Republican who's going to magically just stop this, because anyone who gets to that position will be bought off or whatever. Um, I don't understand these people who still act like Trump is some secret maverick, where we're being now driven into more debt as usual, more military spending, and as it said, there's gonna come a point where there's just no more, because how much can you really continue to borrow? And of course, this just is complete enslavement of all the future generations. I mean, just no one, in the mainstream politics talks about that. They don't talk about the fact that, everyone's kids are being born into complete slavery within the government they're foisted into. Because that government has, for decades and decades decided to pour trillions upon trillions of dollars into profits for these firms, tech firms that create expensive munitions and expensive weapons of war that they use to just kill people in an endless cycle. So, certainly bad news. Well, I'll definitely keep following that, see where that goes. Antiwar.com, can't recommend them enough. So, let's see. All right, let me check if there's any other comments. Information War said supposed to be in bad taste. All right. Well, thanks for being here, Information War. All right. This next article is from CBS News, so beware. We'll see how this article turns out. And I guess this article is via the AP. So, owner of Texas 3D gun company accused of sex with minor resigns after arrest. Austin, Texas. Cody Wilson, the owner of a Texas company that sells blueprints for making untraceable 3D printed guns, has resigned from the firm after being arrested on charges of having sex with an underage girl. An official with Austin-based Defense Distributed said Tuesday that Wilson officially resigned Friday evening to tend to personal matters. Paloma Heindorf, the director of development for the company, made the announcement and said she'll be taking Wilson's place. She also said she's a different person. I'm not trying to replace him as a character, she said. Wilson is accused of paying a 16-year-old girl $500 to have sex with her in Austin. He was arrested in Taiwan and brought back to the U.S. over the weekend. U.S. Marshals Service said Wilson, 30, was booked into Harris County Jail in Houston early Sunday and was held on $150,000 bond. CBS Houston affiliate KQ-TV reported that Wilson was later bonded out after a federal court barred Wilson from posting printable gun blueprints online for free last month. He announced he had begun selling them through his website. Yeah, so I mean, this story has been developing over the past week or so. There's been a lot of talk about it in the libertarian, anarchist circles, because he has become very high profile just within the past few months. I mean, he's been doing this for a few years now, at least, but just in the past few months, it's really exploded with, especially with the mainstream coverage. I mean, as you see, this article was, on CBS News and crap, and I know he was on interviews with a lot of mainstream shows with ABC or CBS or one of those. And honestly, when I started seeing all this mainstream coverage of him, where they're really kind of putting his side out there, and him talking about being a crypto anarchist and stuff, I kind of had in the back of my mind, like, you know, what if something were to happen now to him, a scandal, to tarnish this guy who's kind of become the face of this type of libertarian, and or anarchist. How convenient would it be for all the people, um, all the gun grabbing types, to have this guy be tarnished, and of course be able to write off people and say, oh, all the people who are into individual liberty and into having access to firearms and believe in the Second Amendment, those people can all be lumped together with some kind of negative, connotation, like this story has been so far. I mean, that just seems awfully convenient to me. Who knows at this point whether there's something nefarious, deliberately nefarious going on by the government, like in terms of if this was a total setup, or maybe if it's true on its face that he went and did this without any other government meddling. Either way, it's very convenient for those who've been demonizing the idea of 3D printed guns to have this guy be tarnished. I try to avoid all the mainstream media as much as possible, but I've heard from others that the mainstream media was really, initially when the news first broke a few days ago, were really just outright calling him a straight up like predator or whatever. Just immediately rushing to judgment, ready to call this guy a perv and whatever. When you actually read the charges, I mean, there's nothing about him targeting minors or kids or whatever some of these outlets are putting out. Children, that's a favorite of some of those outlets, because just because it's they're a minor, they go ahead and conflate that with, oh, it's a child. Yeah, well, frankly, there are states, even just in the U.S., that where the age of consent is 16. So, they don't seem to think 16 is a child who is incapable of consenting. Um, yeah, I mean, I know for sure Pennsylvania age of consent is 16, and another podcast that was talking about the Cody Wilson mentioned that the state of Oklahoma actually has 16 as their age of consent, and that was basically within a few hundred miles of where he was at the time this incident took place, allegedly. Um, if he was in Austin, if he had been, around 300 miles north in the state of Oklahoma, then 16 would be considered age of majority there. So, I'm not going to get too deep into all of that right now. There's already a couple of good breakdowns from some good podcasters out there. Um, I know Mance Raider has a good couple episodes, bonus episodes, where he talks about this case and is really rational about it, I think. And there's also um, another podcast. I believe it's through Freedom Phoenix. I'll have to find that. I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you guys know which one I'm referring to. I just can't think of the name right now. Um, but yeah, I mean, this has been discussed. I'm not gonna get into all of that, but yeah, never believe the official story immediately, because there's really no reason to believe the government's lying on anything. But stranger things have happened. Let's put it that way. The government has been involved in many things stranger than using entrapment to bring down people that they dislike. So just keep an open mind on that, and I'll definitely be following that to see what happens. But as the article said, Cody Wilson has stepped down from uh, the head of his company, Defense Distributed, and someone's taking over, and that's pretty expected, I suppose. And I was waiting to see when that would happen, but yeah, hopefully it doesn't affect too much what Defense Distributed is doing right now with their 3D blueprints. And I also just wanted to comment on briefly on that article, and that article is not even the most ridiculous, from what I've heard, ridiculous characterizations put out there on this story already by the mainstream media. But the article I read from the CBS was actually not as bad, because at least they didn't try to make it seem like he was preying on children, quote unquote. But there was that part in the beginning of the article where it said 3D untraceable printed guns. I thought that should be in scare quotes there. I love how, of course, they say it. They're untraceable. Be afraid. There's 3D untraceable guns, as if tracing guns is some kind of infallible science, which it's not. The whole concept of tracing firearms is really another one of those things that's more fiction, more of what's in the TV crime shows, and not necessarily something that always is a reliable science in the real world. So, but of course, it scares people to think they're untraceable and blah blah blah. So, all the mainstream outlets love to put that out there. Um, you know, and yeah, because when all of just a couple months ago, when Cody Wilson was in the news with his lawsuit, with all the leftist liberal attorneys generals suing him over nothing, because his blueprints are already out there, so it's useless to try and stop those blueprints from getting out there when they're out there already. But in any case, when all of that was going on, um, you know, the mainstream outlets all jumped on using terms like untraceable printed guns, and made it seem like any old criminal was going to be printing out guns in their garage or something, when it's still very expensive to do right now for most people. It's really not practical in any sense, and not widespread in any sense, but of course, all the media is interested in is clicks and, uh, getting people to click on their articles and opinions where they scream like the end of the world is coming because of this guy putting out blueprints, which are nothing new really at all. And let's see here. All right, so just some housekeeping. Yeah, today's the community episode. Check out our sponsor, Brave Browser. I'm Cryptic Cynic here with you today. I'm the only available host for today, but hopefully we'll have some of the others back with us on Monday. So apologies for not having a really good setup here as far as the video goes and not having any visuals. But thank you for bearing with me. And since it is the top of the hour, I'll probably look towards closing out here. And thanks, Information War, for commenting. And we'll have to follow all these stories. We have Kavanaugh's story, we have Cody Wilson, um, and of course, there's always things going on, unfortunately, due to um, the military industrial complex. There's always things going on in the Middle East and elsewhere with all kinds of civilian deaths that are being underreported. And so that definitely takes vigilance on the part of us, those of us who want to know the truth. It takes, close following of these issues and using uh, really to report in the mainstream media at all, because they're just interested in using assault as a political football and will never tell you about the violations to the Fourth and First Amendments that these potential Supreme Court people often bring. So, with that, thank you for joining us today on the Bad Morning News podcast. And screw the state, fuck the system. See you guys next week. Have a good weekend, everybody.